Howdy, shalom. Thanks for joining me. I'm continuing in Matthew chapter 5 in a series of teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus has begun a series of sections where he begins it by saying, "You have heard it said, but I say to you." So what he is doing is correcting the misleading and the false assumptions of what it means to be righteous. And he is correcting it by telling you what true righteousness is. So Jesus made the point in chapter 5 of Matthew, verse 20, where he said, your righteousness must exceed the righteousness of the Pharisees and the scribes. And here is one of the ways to do it when it comes to the subject of divorce. Read this. Verse 31. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Now, this is important to grasp here about divorce and about adultery. First of all, he is quoting from the Old Testament where it says, the law of Moses says if you divorce your wife, you have to give her a certificate of divorce. Now, in the Hebrew language, that's the word get. We would say G-E-T, get, but that's the document that allows a woman who has now been divorced to be free to remarry. Okay? Now, people were getting divorced for lots of reasons, and it was usually the man divorcing his wife because he got tired of her, or he got angry at her, or he got upset with her, or she disappointed him in some way. There were women who also divorced their men, so it did go both ways. It was more men than women doing the divorcing. But here's what Jesus says. No such thing as easy divorce in the kingdom of God. This is where righteousness has to exceed the righteousness of the rest of the world. In particular, even, as Jesus said, the Pharisees and the scribes. I tell you, if you divorce your wife, except for sexual immorality, you make her a victim of adultery. In other words, if you have decided that you're just tired of her and you found you a newer model, you traded in your 40-year-old for a 20-year-old, or you got rid of your 60-year-old for a 20-year-old, Jesus is saying that's a sin. That's pretty hard, isn't it? Now, here's what else he's saying. Sexual immorality. Sexual immorality. How do you define sexual immorality? Well, of course, we know that if you committed adultery, if you were unfaithful to your spouse or your spouse was unfaithful to you. But sexual immorality in the Jewish culture also covered same-sex relationships, homosexuality, gay, lesbian, bi, any of the others, trans, any of those. All of those would be considered sexual immorality. Premarital sex, sex with anyone before you were married. That's an important thing to note too. Also, bestiality, sex with an animal. Many of you might be offended by hearing that, but there are those who do that. So what Jesus is saying is if you or your spouse have committed any of these, then divorce is permitted. But if you're divorcing just because you don't want to be married anymore, or you want to be married to someone else, Jesus is saying that's not how we do it in the kingdom of God. That's not the righteousness of the kingdom of God. So that's a different thing. So that's a little tough to handle, isn't it? Not an easy statement for a lot of people, but that's where Jesus is going with that.